Yes,
Yeah.
it really is.
I think Mary said she might.
It was good. All
Yeah,
right.
I was like, oh, no, it's 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
attention.
Everybody ready?
Oh.
Okay, good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. We're going to call the 9 a.m. board briefing meeting together. It looks like let the record reflect that we have 3 commissioners in the conference room, Commissioner Kearns, Commissioner French, and Commissioner Waldron, and we have Commissioner Jordan and myself on Zoom. And just because sometimes it's easier, I'm going to see if our Vice Chair, Commissioner Kearns, will run the meeting for me today.
Yes, no problem. Well, to kick off the meeting, we are joined by Tom Konis, our county assessor. Looks like we're going to talk about current use program briefing.
Yes, good morning. I've also brought Joe Hollenbeck, my chief deputy, along. This is another one of those times when I'm gonna come to you and I'm not gonna ask for a darn thing. So, remember that when I do have to come and ask for something, though.
That's why you're our favorite.
About a year and a half ago, I came to you and asked for an additional employee to help us get caught up on our current use properties. We were lagging, but we're also leading the state in how we are processing these and tracking them. Actually, the Department of Revenue has people call us to talk to them about how we do our job. So what we're doing is working, and that's kind of what I want to share with you today. As we can see, Ron, if we can go to the next slide, this is our Farm and Ag program. We have, as you can see, we've removed a total of 209 properties from the program that did not, for whatever reason, qualify. So oftentimes it is that they have chosen to come out of the program. They're going to go ahead and develop the property. But that is what my people are working on over there right now. So on the next page, talks about the designated forest. And we've got different programs involved under the current use, of course. So we've got the farm and ag land, the open space, and the designated forest. Designated forest means that they have to be managing their timberland, not just that they have trees on their property, but that's really one of the only requirements for it. And you can see that we've had quite a few new acres added under this designation. Some of those acreage that was added was property that we moved from forest or from ag land into timber because it would qualify for the timber, but they weren't actively farming it anymore, so it didn't qualify for that. On the next page talks about the open space and the ag conversion. We have just the one involved in that one. We have 45 total active parcels and no new applicants. The last one is, when I talked to you a year and a half ago, I said we could bring in about $1 million in tax, and that's taxes and penalties. I'm here to tell you, we didn't make that. We brought in $850,000 worth. Still a good amount, and what we're doing is we're making the tax base correct, which we didn't have before. We had people out there taking advantage of being into this program. They signed up 30 years ago and nobody was checking on it. And so now we are checking on them. So it definitely is a success. We feel that within probably 3 years, that extra position will not be necessary for that anymore because we'll be caught up. However, we are concerned when Growth Management Act changes, not knowing how many acres will be involved in that are impacted by current use parcels where they're going to want to develop it. So there may be quite a number of renewal people pulling out of the system at that time. We just don't know that number. The other thing I wanted to update you really quickly on is at the end of the month, the 31st, we will be mailing out 225,000 notices for our annual reval. And I know you guys always get the calls the same as we do. The nice thing this year is countywide, the total average increase is 1.3%, which is a lot better than 30.
Yeah.
Now that is countywide average. There are places that change at different rates, depending on where they're located in the county. Some are going down more, some are going up more. What really we are seeing the increase in value in is land. It's just absolutely incredible, and some of that now we're already seeing because of the new laws allowing multiple units on a single city parcel of land, where these speculators are buying that land to chop up. We've got one up on Mount Hill Boulevard that's gonna be 5 lots. And they're 20 feet wide, 16 feet wide lots. And there's,
your neighbor says.
and they're gonna build $1 million properties on each one of those.
Oh.
This is not curing our middle housing problem, unfortunately. So hopefully that will settle down, but that's what we're seeing right now, is definitely still land. They're just not making any more dirt, and with, we're getting compacted here. So we will need help when the opportunity arises to look at the growth management boundaries. We're looking forward to that. And I'll take any questions if there are any.
Any questions for Tom? Looks like we're good.
Easy peasy. Okay, I'll see you in about a year.
Yep.
Tell you that we don't need anything.
Okay, next up, that brings us to Erin Gertel. Is Erin? Yep, there she is online with us.
Good morning,
right.
everyone.
Welcome, Erin. How are things out at the fair?
Really good. The energy's building. We feel the fair is coming our way this fall, and it's keeping us extra busy, but we're excited.
All right, well, take it away.
Yeah, today I'm here to brief you on a grant that we've been awarded from the Washington State Department of Agriculture for $250,000. And this is for a capital project where we will be improving our restroom facilities in our campground area. Currently, we have some really outdated, limited facilities. With this grant, we will be able to put that money towards a bigger project of building a facility with 4 restrooms we're looking at right now, and then 4 individual shower stalls. But we're still working through the planning and our budget, but we're excited about this opportunity. Our campgrounds are just a little gem located here and near the city and conveniently located, and with improved amenities, I am sure we can see even more users. And with that, I just ask for, your approval next Tuesday on accepting this award so we can move forward.
All right, any questions for Erin? All right, you got it, Erin. Thank you.
Great. Good to see all of you. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.
All right, next up, we have Kyle. We're a little ahead of schedule. He's probably in the small conference room right now. Is Matt in there? Doug's here. Good. No? Well, we can, Doug, do you wanna go? Sure. Okay. All right, we'll jump down to Doug Chase. Parks, Recreation and Golf Director, gonna brief us on.
I thought I could listen to Aaron's presentations.
Brief us on some easements.
Yes, a navigation easement. We'll have Ron Pope. I think we have a nice presentation for you. And I will put on my Julie Neff hat, who has been doing a fabulous job working with the city of Spokane on this. And we'll see, should look like make Beacon Hill Public Phase 2. There we go. And here we have, you might recognize this. We've received a grant award. Partnered with the city of Spokane through a MOU. And we are working together. The city has taken a lead on this project, which has been fabulous. And oddly enough, as you look at that, you may recall the county parks parcel on the left and the city parks property on the right there in blue. We've actually, back in the 90s, developed and improved the city's parcel there to take advantage of the climbing rocks. And we've cared for those for decades, and that MOU solidified that relationship and that care, and as well as set the framework for at some point down the road, should this property ever be annexed, the city will take over the operations of it. But in the interim, we're working together and collaborating on developing some improvements. So I'll go ahead and jump to the next slide. And again, here's a refresher. You can see kind of a close-up and some of the trailhead improvements and playground and climbing and access that's been identified with the grant and our match of 300,000 that we brought to the table. And again, we coordinated with the city with the grant application as well. Next slide, please. And here's just some photos of what the site looks like. Next slide, please. And again, the project site area and where we're at. I think the next slide will likely show us that navigation easement. There we go. And we are within Phelps Field there. You can see it on the bottom of the slide. And in working to complete these improvements, we need to put a navigation easement in at no cost. And that easement will actually go to the airport, back to the county and the city as a collaboration in the shared ownership of that. So you can see the airfield overlay area. It will not impact the improvements that we're making, that we've identified to make here at the site. Next slide, please. And there's, you can see a shot of the popular climbing rocks there. And so that is why we're here to, if the navigation easement is acceptable, we would look to come back and have that before you next week on your consent agenda. And then specific to the project, we expect to come back and see you in the next 4 weeks with more specific update in collaboration with the city on exactly as they're finalizing the design and the elements. I think we may be a little bit under budget and might look at something for 2025 as a way to complete the full elements, but we'll look forward to bringing that back to you in the next month or so. As far as getting deeper in, but this is just helps to keep the project on track and moving forward through the permitting process to commence.
Okay, questions or Mr. Walters?
So what is the time frame then for, sounds like it's a multi-phase improvement plan? What are some of those phases that you guys are looking
Well,
towards?
I think, and
Is that on
that's,
one of the slides? I apologize.
I think slide 4 mentions they're
Oh.
targeting a potential start in late 24.
Okay,
And so I think the hope is to get underway by the end of this calendar year, but we know the construction will continue into 25. Which is why we may look at utilizing the 25 budget process to potentially help add back in a couple of the alternates. And again, they're finalizing that information now so that we can bring that back to you in detail.
but the city's handling the whole RFP for
Yes,
that.
they are taking
For the
lead on
bid
all of
process.
that, which has again been very helpful with the other projects that we have.
Yes, you've got a lot on your
Yeah,
plate, so that's
we
great.
do. And we'll be.
This will be so exciting. I was hearing people talking about it at the Bear Lake groundbreaking. Because a lot of the folks who were there, many of them also are have disabilities and they're excited about using this facility for climbing.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's a great other addition, you know, for folks to be able to have assisted climbing.
Yes,
So, yeah.
it's huge. And if, again, on slide 4, if you look at keynotes 16 and 17 speak to the adaptive trail starting point and the trail terminus at the rock walls. And that really is a big part of this project, is trying to improve and expand the accessibility. It's been a very popular site for adaptive climbing, and that's like you mentioned, one of the exciting elements. That's a lot of energy and support for it.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Doug.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
Stick
Next
around.
up, we'll go to Kyle and Matt. To talk about some road establishments.
Yeah, got another slew of these we're running through. These are kind of trying to group them. I believe all these are out in the valley. So, all right. So first one, you can see it's kind of on the southeast edge of City of Spokane Valley. A number of these are that Ridgemont, Dumont, Belmont area. And so this is a small one. You can see just the extension of a cul-de-sac and one connection. And they're infilling a lot of those plats there to building out the last phases of them. Next slide. Thank you. This is another one you can see again. This one's 32nd and Highway 27. I think this is a pretty big D.R. Horton plat. If you've driven south out of town on Highway 27, you've probably seen it directly south of the little cemetery there at the corner of 32nd and Highway 2. And they were building quick. This one, I believe, is about half built out in 6 months. So they're moving right down the roads. Next one.
And it's only what's in red, correct?
Correct.
None
Yeah,
of
the
the
roads
other-
that are proposed for establishment are the red lines. Everything else is either existing or not being proposed for establishment yet. And this one, you can see Chapman is the curved road looping around, and this is the last phase of the platform side heights. It's going in there, building that loop, also the connection down across Chapman. Next one. This one is a little different area. This is off Park. This is over next to Commissioner Cooney's neighborhood. And you can see there we got kind of a couple of phases that we're putting in for establishment. Taylor Cottages is the overall preliminary plat name, but the projects are all south of 12th and west of Park. Next one. Now we're back up in the Ridgemont area again. This is Timberlane Terrace, again, multi-phase plats. This is 2 phases, it looks like. Next one. So this is last one. This is Twin Bridges. This is South Barker Road area. See, not sure it quite shows, but Barker would be along the west side. This was a little further over. And this is also three phases. We're doing a lot of catch up. That's why you guys are getting such a big rush of establishments, is trying to get caught up on a lot of these. We've been maintaining these roadways for the most part anyway, but we need to get through the formalization of it. We do get a little bit of tax for the road miles, so it's not a bad thing to get them formally in the system and just make sure we're taking care of them, keeping up on the routine maintenance, the crack sealing and all that too. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions?
So when we formalize this, then do you go back then and update the roadblock, and then this just how frequently does that update happen? And how frequently do we update crap?
You know, there's the annual update. We
Yeah.
are constantly in the roadblock updating it. And it's virtually real time. We're
Okay.
in their database updating these roads throughout the year. And then we have the annual report where everything gets updated.
Good,
Like,
okay,
it's with their new software, it's continuous.
good, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Cuny?
Yes, so Matt, as we bring these roads in and you say we're already maintaining them, how are we doing on snow plowing? Because I know, especially that first one, you know, kind of comes through the city of Spokane Valley, and we've talked about in the past. I don't know that you and I, Chad and I had talked about a lot of trying to coordinate with the city of the valley on some of those, so it's not us trying to get to these kind of distant roads where they're already there. And so have we made any progress in that?
You know, informally for the little pieces of road here and there that don't make sense for us to be maintaining because they're in the island of city of Spokane Valley or city of Spokane, we will oftentimes just coordinate at a staff level. And they'll pick up a road that makes sense that's inside the city of Spokane and hard for us to get to and vice versa, you know. It does go both ways and it's really informal at this point. But seems to work pretty well.
Okay, because I'm sometimes hear from citizens that it's not, so.
Well, you know what I mean? This year, we didn't go into flat residentials. We didn't have enough snow at any one point where it made sense to go into the flat residentials, and so it was unusually light this year. We kind of got off easy, and that's helpful. We've been able to put money back into preservation this year, which has not always been the case. But yeah, no, it's yeah, you know how it goes, Commissioner Cooney. Snow removal's the thing.
Just want to make sure we're thinking about it. So as we bring them into the system,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much.
All right, have a good day.
Oh, I thought this might be a typo, but I'm glad it's not. We are joined by Paul.
Here.
Hello. Paul,
morning,
let
everybody.
me get your title right.
Oh, yeah. I
Washington State Parks East Side Trails Coordinator.
think that's shorter than my previous county title, right?
that again, Paul.
We can change that. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I think I have a presentation, Ron. Yeah. Times.
This is great.
Excellence. Well, yeah, so I'm here on behalf of State Parks to just provide a quick overview and heads up on our Mount Spokane Master Plan project. So Melinda Posner, who's kind of my partner in crime on this, couldn't make it. She had a scheduling conflict, so it's just gonna be me. Ron, okay, perfect. So why am I here besides the project itself? So I wanted to kind of gauge the commissioner's level of interest in this project and sort of desired level of engagement, and then just kind of understand maybe a little bit more about how Mount Spokane fits within your vision for Spokane County. We might not have enough time to do it here, so maybe there's a follow-up. Next slide. So some fun facts, trivia about Mount Spokane. I don't know if you knew, I didn't, certainly, that Spokane County was instrumental in the foundation of that park. So Spokane County acquired the first 320 acres at the summit back in 1920. But at that time, counties weren't legally enabled to operate parks. So the county worked with Louis Davenport Hotels to essentially set up a trust to own the property until figured out a solution with the state. So it is also one of 3 downhill ski areas operate within a state park nationally. So it's kind of unique and a little bit of a unicorn in that way. It is the largest state park at over 12,000 acres and one of the most visited as well, with over 460,000 visitors a year. Next slide. So why are we doing a master plan? Well, for starters, you may have heard that we last year acquired Bear Creek Lodge and that property that kind of sits at the entrance to the park. So everybody, I think most people assume that is the entrance to the park, but it was outside of our official entrance. So we now own that property, the lodge, and 130 acres associated with it. So trying to figure out long-term what we need to do with that property is a big question. We've also, like county parks, seen a significant increase in use post-COVID. And then we have the North Spokane Corridor Project, which is likely to drive additional traffic and visitation to the park once that's complete. And then, you know, we also have like a slew of just old projects sitting in the parking lot of ideas that we need to sort of either strike off and move on from, or revisit and see if they still make sense now, given how things have changed over time. Next slide. So just an idea on that increasing use. So what you see here is anonymized cell phone data up there through Earth Economics. So this is January of 2019 versus January of 2021. Now things have ratcheted back a little bit since that kind of COVID boom, but still it's gotten a lot busier in the wintertime. And then next slide, you'll see kind of August 2019 versus August 2020. And so you see a lot more use in the park and that being spread out throughout the park in places where we didn't see a lot of use before. So again, that's probably ratcheted back a little bit, but it's still significantly elevated from pre-COVID. Next slide. So what are we hoping to deliver through this project? So for starters, we need to get a better handle on just our infrastructure and constraints up there. So stuff like water supply and wells and power and things like that. We also need to look at kind of long-term boundary of the park. Does it still make sense, the long-term boundary for the park? So basically looking at if opportunities came up to acquire property and it was within that long-term boundary, state parks could potentially pursue that. You know, that was established back in 1999. Does it still make sense today, or do we need to make some adjustments? Our trail plan up there is basically been fully implemented, and there's of course always demand for more trails. So trying to figure out where we put those or how we address existing trails. It's a good question. And then kind of our capital needs up there at the park. So think about long-term operations, storage, roads, things like that. And then really kind of figuring out how we implement those recommendations over time. What are our priorities? Next slide. As far as what we've done so far in engagement, we're in the process of engaging with area tribes. Then on the community side of things, we have our first event June 1st, and that's partly why I wanted to get in front of you before that date. It's going to be at the Wonder Building, and it's kind of intended to be sort of a project kickoff and community event. So it's an opportunity for folks to learn more about the mountain and also provide some input along the way. We're kind of trying to not make it feel like a kind of government-y workshop, open house, but more of like fun. I don't know. Hopefully it's possible. I hope so. So we're hoping to get a lot of people in on, it's a Saturday morning, 9 to 11:30, and really trying to get more families, kind of that more passive voice that we don't hear from, because we hear a lot from folks that are really engaged up at the park. So we kind of know how they feel about things. We also have towards the end of July, a concept charrette where we're basically, folks would sign up in advance. We'd have 32 participants and basically break them up into groups and really focus on a geographic quadrant within the park. So that should be an interesting opportunity. And then we have online surveys, interviews, stakeholder interviews, and meetings with partners and potentially including you. Next slide. So timeline, we've been kind of at this since early March with trying to figure out what we want to do, what the deliverables are, and the end goal is getting to June of next year with a plan that's approved by the Parks and Recreation Commission. And then I think I've got two more slides. Yeah, so question one really for you is, and if you're not ready to answer, that's fine. Maybe I can revisit either through Doug or whoever, but you know, how does Mount Spokane fit within your vision for Spokane County?
Where you want a response?
Dot. I guess.
Doug, you can weigh in
I
here
would say
too.
continue to own and operate it. You're doing a great job.
Are you sure?
That's an exciting acquisition.
Yeah.
You've got a good.
What he said.
Okay. All right, then on to question. Oh,
Well,
sorry.
I was just gonna say, I think that everything you're talking about is really important because I do see it as a park that more and more people are kind of discovering.
Yep.
And as our population grows here, there's gonna be more use. And so I like everything you're talking about in terms of trying to make sure that as more people use it, that we can accommodate that,
Yeah.
right? In a way that doesn't overwhelm the natural features of the park. So
Yeah.
that would be, but yeah, and to Doug's point, yay, we all get to enjoy it in Spokane County, but state parks has to maintain it, so yay.
Commissioner CUNY?
Yeah, no, I think it's super exciting, and I'm with Doug in that, yeah, you guys get to own and operate it and we just get to enjoy it. But is there a way to coordinate kind of for citizens who really don't know the difference between what a county park is versus a state park and all of that, to just be making sure that as we have visitors coming in and new citizens to the area, you know, that they understand you know, where they can go to do hikes and all of that and enjoy all the natural beauty that we have in Spokane County. I think it just helps with our economic development as the more that we can cross promote. So I don't know if you guys are already doing that or not, but that would be, I think, what I would see, you know, partly having happen, you know, would want to make happen.
Yeah, to that point, I know we've been talking with Visit Spokane related to this project and understanding how visitors perceive the park. And I think for folks that know the park well, it's easy to figure out where to go. But if you're new to the area, and it does actually receive a lot of outside visitors that are in town for various reasons and go up to the mountain, it's not super user friendly in that way to figure out where you want to go. And you know, if you've got an hour or two. So I think that's something that we've heard as a common theme that we want to try to address through this project is better wayfinding signage, and really making sure that people know what the options are when they go there and can figure out how to get there relatively quick.
Yeah, and just on our parks website, is there a way to promote those other, you know, the state parks as well, you know, just in links or something? So, you know, trying to make it easier. And I do just have to say, it's great to see you, Paul.
Likewise.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah. And then last slide. How would you like to be involved in this project process? Should I just be working directly with Doug on that? Yeah. Okay.
Doug's our expert.
Sounds
Although
good.
it used to be Paul, so.
I don't know about that.
Ouch.
Doug taught Paul everything. he
Exactly.
knows. We're getting the band back together.
I know, just letting you know, we miss you, Paul.
Miss you too. All who? Well, thank you for having me here, and I'll continue to work with Doug as this project progresses. And yeah, thanks for the time.
All right, it's great to see you.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we've got George.
I want to keep talking about awesome mountain biking trails in Spokane County. We're here today to brief you on a grant extension from Washington State Department of Commerce. So going to turn that over to Chris McKinney.
Thanks, everyone. So if you remember a little bit in the past about the Consolidated Homeless grant, that's a $8.7 million biennial award that we received from the Department of Commerce. This is a supplemental award coming from the Department of Commerce to bridge some gaps that they're seeing in the homelessness response system. Spokane County was awarded a total of $2.4 million in some different respective kind of line items. 1.2 being from the CHG standard overall budget. That's just a supplemental increase to that. There are two respective inflation increases for each funding year, 2024 and 2025, of $74,000 each. And there are some local document reporting fee support that totals about $1 million. So it all equals about $2.4 million. This is kind of a briefing to the board to put in front of you guys as an approval item for next week to increase our award from about 8.7 million to about $11.1 million total. And those will be used for, of course, the ongoing RFP process, funding deliberations that you guys have heard from us a couple times about. And we will be back in front of you guys in a couple weeks to present those respective projects and funding recommendations by the Housing and Community Development Advisory Committee.
All right, any questions? Mr. Waldron?
So were these already anticipated that you knew that this supplemental money would be coming in? So did you already account for that in the process asking for proposals and looking at preliminary dollars, or will this add to what you've already started to? And we haven't made final decisions, but you've done a process where you've looked at proposals and ranked them, right? And given some recommendations.
Absolutely. So Commerce had indicated that there was a potential of receiving supplemental funding from CHG awards. If we were to guess, this would be higher than what we were expecting to see.
Significantly higher than what
That's
we were
that's fair.
expecting to see.
That's fair. But we also did work that into our funding deliberation process. So we did select alternative projects that could be good.
Okay, so you have some that you could then fund on the list
Absolutely.
or fund at a higher level.
Absolutely.
So how will you make those recommendations to us about which ones should get funded or which ones should get funded at a higher level?
So we'll put these funds in front of the advisory committee to make those funding deliberations. It will be, of course, their recommendation to you on funding those alternates as well as the additional projects that may or may not be funded with this. I will say that with this amount, with the alternates and a couple of other options that we're looking at, we wouldn't be looking at any significant increase in projects being funded. It would just be those alternative projects that are receiving additional funds, as well as potentially another project that we can pick up from another portfolio. That answers your question.
Commissioner Jordan.
Sorry, I might have missed that part. Did you say are the alternates add-ons to currently recommended projects, or are they new projects entirely that weren't recommended initially?
That's a good question. So a couple of the projects were identified as alternate funding, as alternate options, and they were recommended for increased amounts, while there were a couple that were unfunded projects that would be recommended if we were to receive additional funds. So if I'm remembering correctly, I believe there was about 2 or 3 projects that would have gone unfunded without supplemental funds, and that may be recommended for funding through the advisory committee. Maybe 2 projects that were recommended for reduced awards that would be recommended for increased awards with the supplemental funds.
Very good, thank you.
All right.
Questions? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Right, we're gonna stick with George here.
So next up, we have an update to our HUD entitlement program. So this is our Community Development Block Grant Program, Home Investment Partnership Program, as well as the Emergency Solutions Grant Program. So every year we have to do what's called our annual action plan. So this is a summary of different findings, community engagement, and then how we intend to allocate resources. So it's not a grant application to HUD, but it's a grant application to HUD. That we're required to do. So part of that has a 30-day public comment period that just ended yesterday. So Aiden's going to brief us on the annual action plan that we intend to submit to HUD after legislative approval.
Good morning. I believe that there might have been an associated slides uploaded. If there aren't, I can just continue on. I'll pull that for us. Alrighty, so as George very generously put, I'm here to present information about our annual action plan, which we will be submitting to HUD in a couple of weeks here. So as George stated, that our programs are split up into 3 separate categories. That's CDBG, Home, and ESG. CDBG is the Community Development Block Grant. I oversee that program. We selected multiple different projects for this year. I believe it ended up being about after things have been moving around a lot lately, so bear with me, but I believe there were 4 projects that are capital public infrastructure projects that were selected, and then there were 3, but we just got our updated entitlement amount yesterday, so we pulled a couple of strings, and we are, I believe, going to fund 4 separate public services projects, and that's set at a 15% cap of our total entitlement amount. If you'll go to the next slide, we also have 2 home projects that will be funded through HUD awarded funding, excuse me. The home program also oversees other projects that is funded through local funding, that is the local document recording fees. However, we do not report those to HUD. We only report the projects that will be funded through federal dollars. So there's other stuff going on behind the curtain, but we won't be reporting that information. And then there will be one project that will be funded through ESG. That's on the next slide. That is our smallest bucket provided through federal dollars. And that will be a Catholic charity, St. Margaret's Shelter. That's a rapid rehousing program, which Chris McKinney will be overseeing. So those are the projects that will be selected, that will be reported in our annual action plan that will be submitted to HUD. If you have any questions or comments about that, I will be more than welcome to take that information. Brief timeline of where we're at in our process is that those projects were selected by the HCDAC, and those contracts are currently in the works. We will be coming back to you over the next couple of weeks to approve or revise any of those contracts as needed. And then we believe that we will submit our annual action plan within the next weeks.
One of the projects Aiden mentioned in there, we got our formal awards, so HUD's always a little delayed on getting those formal award numbers to us. We just received those yesterday afternoon from our local HUD representative. And then when Aiden and I took a look at that, it meant that we had about $25,000 more to be able to fund in services. And so similar to Chris's portfolio, where we went 5 deep on alternative funding recommendations, we went 2 deep on Aiden's portfolio on funding recommendations. So one of those, our number one alternative, if we had extra funding, was Partners Midland Northwest, formerly Spokane Valley Partners. So Aiden reached out to the executive director at Spokane Valley Partners yesterday and just had a conversation with them about can they use that additional funding. Of course, they said they can. We also had a conversation about the second project that was identified as an alternative, which was the Greenhouse Food Bank up in Deer Park. And so Aiden was able to have a conversation with partners to see if there was an opportunity to be able to help that organization out in some way, given the limited resources. So we're happy to see partnership within the community. And that we're able to go a little deeper on the funding for some of these really essential services that are difficult for those organizations to find. So that's one of the projects that had not previously been identified outside of an alternative recommended by the advisory committee at their April 11th meeting.
Any questions?
Just, thank you. So do those projects not have to be listed in the action plan?
The alternatives?
Yeah.
No, HUD only wants to know what's actually been
Actually
funded, because that's what we have to report on.
Okay.
I will say that because we just got our entitlement amount yesterday, the projects that you saw earlier on the screen did not include Partners in the Northwest. We will amend the annual action plan after this meeting to reflect that change.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. The final. Okay, thank you very much.
That's it. Thanks.
Right, next up, that brings us to Scott Chesney. We are way ahead of schedule. So we know, is he online or in person? He is. Oh, here we are.
Might be watching up too.
Oh, maybe you say it. Scott, are you with us on Zoom? Okay, not quite. He's probably walking over. I think Ron's probably right. He's walking over. Okay. Do we want to jump on? Well, he's our next two. We want to move down to miscellaneous. Talk about any media press releases or proclamations.
Good morning.
Morning.
Okay, later today, you have a proclamation for National Public Works Week, which will be presented by Commissioner French and received by Kyle Tuig. And then on May 28th, it's the Eric Brian Johnson Proclamation presented by Commissioner CUNY.
Okay.
We also have the Doris Morrison Learning Center has been hosting probably 1,500 fifth graders on a regular basis for the Wetland Explorer field trips. And so we're going to have media out there on Thursday this week. If any of you are able to join us, you are more than welcome.
Good.
It'll start at 9 o'clock.
Commissioner Jordan.
Just a question on the Eric Johnson proclamation. Just curious, is that something that many or multiple counties are doing, or are we kind of ahead on the curve in terms of recognizing him?
My understanding from Commissioner CUNY is that this came from Wasac and other counties are participating.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. So his retirement party is tomorrow night. And so a bunch of counties are presenting the proclamations to him tomorrow night, but his actual retirement date is the end of the month. And so that was kind of the figuring out how to present the proclamation to him in person, but yet have the proclamation be at the end of the month. So, and we're not the only counties. All counties were asked to do a proclamation.
Sounds good. Even if we were, I'd still support it. Was just curious. So that sounds great.
And I think based on we got a draft one and then I mocked it up, and I think that's one that you guys all saw last week. So thank you for the head nods on that last week.
Yep. Okay. I say, Pat, looks like you've unmuted.
Yeah, I was just going to mention for the commissioners, we got some good coverage on the opioid settlement funds news release. We have some continued interest from a reporter. I think Martha Lou will be working with, or I'll be working with, to get them some more information. Justin has set for a number of interviews. We expect a piece in one of our weeklies on the opioid settlement dollars and how the county is using them. And there may be a national media opportunity on that as well. I'm still exploring what's to come on that. There's been some national reporting, which Scott and others have noticed, suggesting that not all counties or municipalities have solid plans or have really come up or released their plans yet for opioid dollars. So be seeing if there's an opportunity to spotlight the board's leadership in that regard and community services leadership. And then, of course, Expo is still ongoing, and we've gotten the courthouse was lit up for the first week. It'll be lit up again for the last week of Expo. Commissioner Waldriff recorded. I won't give away her steal her thunder, but she recorded KSPS Spotlight last week, and we'll have some more to say on Expo and its history and what was done 50 years ago. It's two great guests. So look for that later this week. It should air this weekend, I believe. I'll check with Jessica, but we'll get that out and promote it. And we've got the next commissioner schedule. We've reached out to your offices about who's up next for the next 2 months. So trying to get that on the books as well.
Okay, thank you. All right.
I just wanted to thank Martha Lou for all your work to get us all organized for the opening Expo ceremonies and making sure we knew what was going on and keeping us involved. And we keep finding more things we might want to put in your Expo display cabinet. So stay tuned.
All right. Well, and this morning I sent to all of you and your executive assistants an invitation for a sneak peek at the newly renovated Post Street Bridge, and that will be on June 4th. So please check that out in your email. I know that Kelly Brown would appreciate an RSVP. So thank you.
It's finally
Thank
gonna
you.
be done.
All right. Okay. We are joined by Scott Chesney. We're way ahead of schedule, so. We
Sorry.
don't blame you for not being.
Power walk over.
We had you up on our screen. We were working on our land capacity analysis. So
Very nice.
spirited discussion about what's growth and what's a partially used land. And then all of a sudden I saw Ron going, promote to panelists. It's like, oh my God. So my apologies.
No,
We have-
no need to apologize.
Two things before you today. First is the beginnings of a discussion on utility scale wind energy and potentially solar. We have put together I'd call it simply a talking paper, code based to some degree on Whitman County. It was provided to us by Commissioner Kearns. We've done some other research, Snohomish and some of the other counties on what they're thinking about for industrial scale energy. And this is obviously a very early stage of that, but recognizing that we have been informed by outside sources that upwards of 15,000 acres of land is claimed to have been under lease from energy companies already in our mostly in the southern counties, including some lands that show up being adjacent to Turnbull Wildlife Refuge. So there is a sense of urgency for the county to consider how it wants to handle renewable energy. And Ron, do you have that document? We didn't do any particularly fancy show on this, but if you look at on the first and second pages, item E, where it talks about permit application, the conditional use, and then a number of these conditions are up here as really talking points and suggestions to get a story started. Obviously, you know, we would have to have identifications of critical areas, geohazard sites, buffer areas, all resource lands identified, wildlife corridors, wildlife refuges, and then going on to the next page, it starts to also talk about distances from things. And the idea of this would be the starting point of what would be the conditions that the commissioners would want to see attached to a project. What we would do is then we would map those. In a sense, what does that take out of consideration? What does it leave in consideration? It's at least our working assumption that the state body, FSEC, the Energy Facility Siting Committee, would look at our regs and say, are you permitting this? Are you trying to prohibit this at all? Are you trying to find places where you will support it? And how defensible are your parameters on where you don't want it? And right now we're basing those kind of on the GMA principles that we can't de-designate or damage our resource lands, chiefly our large and small tract ag and forestry and mineral lands. And so if those come out of the equation, what's left? And you know, that's a starting point for your consideration as well. So part of this is for us to get some direction from you on how you'd like to refine this mapping criteria over policy criteria to create something that we can put into our zoning code as a starting point. And I guess to go back, the state committee, which is a multidisciplinary group, ecology, fish and wildlife, commerce, others sit on it. It serves at the pleasure of the governor and reports to the governor. And if a project is proposed in a county is given a seat at that table as well, making that recommendation. However, in the realm of the state having a wider perspective, the FSEC group does have the ability to preempt local land regs. So having something that we feel is defensible gives us a much better chance to make that argument with that committee rather than there's no place that's allowed in Spokane County or where we are now, which is essentially silent in our zoning code. So I'm open to any questions of what we've done so far or ideas that we can take back. Mr. French?
So I've not had a chance to read this, but do you address like for wind turbine farms, protecting birds of prey?
We would suggest yes, and that would be putting it some distance from Turnbull. We're also recognizing that we're in a flyway and trying to protect that flyway. We didn't specifically at this level discuss birds of prey per se.
So does it then recognize the flight patterns for SIA and Fairchild then?
Yes, it would. We would have to recognize those, especially in the military influence areas that are already well defined. That's a pretty easy boundary to put on that.
So there, I think it was the name of the corporation, it's been a while, is ESI. Is a corporation on the eastern side of the country that specializes in wind turbine farms. And Department of Justice came down and whacked them pretty good for killing eagles and hawks and stuff. So I don't know if there's any language in that decision that might be informative to what we're doing here, but they whacked him pretty good.
We'll take a look at that. The other local one that we're aware of is in the Columbia Basin, the proposal in the Horse Heavens Hills area that proposed 500 or so towers. A number of those were in the nesting area of a relatively rare hawk, and the state board reduced their tower capacity by over half, saying they also couldn't have anything within some distance of known or likely nesting sites. And it was 3 or 4 miles from that. So there are some precedents for what you're suggesting.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Jordan.
Just in skimming this morning, one of the concerns I have is the restriction that is put in, and I understand this is a draft, but there was a setback provision in there. And if I read that correctly, it basically says, you know, if you're a property owner and you want to have a wind turbine on your property, you can't set that wind turbine, or you have to set it 4 times the height of the turbine away from the nearest property line, if I read that right. And I thought Whitman County only has a 1 times height setback restriction. So I'm wondering what the thought process is in recommending or suggesting that we make such a departure from Whitman County.
Our thought at this point was recognizing that many of the complaints we have heard and read about from property owners are about the visual clutter as much as the technical clutter. And a 4 times setback would reduce that angle of viewing fairly substantially. Pretty much based on that impact.
What I've heard people talk about is actually the humming, like that there's like a humming that I guess that comes off of the windmills, kind of a constant, I mean, almost like a buzz, kind of a buzz or a humming sound that they make.
That as well.
So blowing in the wind, it's a song.
Okay.
So just to clarify, is this a recommendation, Scott, or where does this 4 times number come from? Because it concerns me that we're suggesting this is based off of Whitman County's approach, but it's potentially 4 times as restrictive, which seems quite severe in terms of limiting what private property owners can do with clean energy on their property.
This is not a recommendation. This is simply a compilation of ideas and data that we found from starting from Whitman County, but some other areas. There's no hard and fast conclusion to the 4 times. We put that in simply as a benchmark to address visual clutter as much as anything else.
Commissioner Cuny.
So yeah, so I just have to, add in that obviously I'm getting a lot of comments from South County as there's potential for wind turbines going in down in South County, which is valuable farmland that is affecting, and crop dusters can't crop dust like they do for the wheat fields and all of that. You know, so it has more significance on just even outside the area of the turbine. You know, to other property owners that could be close to it. So I mean, you know, I'm not sure that 4 times is the right number, but I mean, I definitely think more than 1 times because, and it would be interesting to talk to some of the crop dusters to see if someone puts it on their property, how that affects somebody else's property, for it. So you know, so it's just a question I think we need to think about and look at, you know, because what we don't want to be doing is letting someone else on their property affect using their agricultural land when GMA is all about protecting that agricultural land. So that just one of the thoughts I think we need to think about.
Commissioner Jordan.
Another question I have just in thinking about this is whether we've had any engagement with Avista on this issue, and maybe as we're exploring this, that's something that we could do in some formal way. I was just kind of poking around on some of their documents online where they talk about what their energy mix is, and at least what I found online last night showed that they currently have 9% of their generation capacity from wind for their customers, if I'm reading their website correctly. And it looked like projecting out into the future, they have, you know, they envision wind power being a significant part of their generation portfolio, probably in part because they have state law requirements they need to meet, I think by 2045, to move towards more non-greenhouse gas emitting energy sources. So I just wonder what Avista's perspective is on restrictions on various energy sources like this.
Commissioner Jordan, we have not yet talked with Avista directly. This was put together sort of with a time of the essence approach to get something on the table for all of you to talk about. Commissioner French and I, though, have had meetings with a couple of energy companies that at the time indicated they had not intended to contract with Avista. They were more producing power just on the open market. So we will definitely follow up with Avista and see what their approach would be for this.
Commissioner CUNY, did you have something to that?
Yes, so I can say that I've talked to Paul Kimball, who represents kind of the Southern County area and Whitman County, I think, for Avista. We've had discussions on it. Currently, the company that's looking into going into the South County, it's a separate energy company that is probably going to California. So any energy generated would be going outside the area, would not be going to Avista customers. But they would have to be able to use the Avista transmission lines to get that energy, you know, once they produce it from the wind turbines. And that process, there hasn't been any request to Avista yet to use their transmission lines. So, so Avista is following it. They're aware.
Okay. Mr. Waldron.
Thank you. Well, thanks for working on this draft. I didn't realize we didn't have standards, so it's good that we're looking at what those would look like. And I guess to Commissioner Jordan's point, what would it be possible to have some explanation of why some of these numbers are in there as the next step? Like, sure, his point around the 4 times. And I've just started looking through this myself, but the 4 times distance, minimum distance away from the property line, maybe in every area where you're recommending a certain distance or a certain setback, or like the 10 times the maximum height of a turbine, for instance, maybe some explanation of where that might be coming from. How does it compare to other counties that around us that have had maybe a longer history with wind turbines?
Yes, the easy answer is yes. Our group is is currently doing their research on what we would call best practices. We're looking at where these have been used all over the United States and frankly, even Scandinavia and some other places that have a long history of wind power. So we will have that for you at a future session. And depending on your schedule and recognizing that this is a fairly complex subject, perhaps one of your strategic planning sessions rather than a future briefing, we could all dig into this a little more deeply.
Great.
I will also just remind it, it is marked draft. It is a draft and changes can be made. So Commissioner Jordan.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Scott. I'd love to have a chance to just have a deeper discussion. It seems to be quite complex with many layers to it. A couple of the other layers I'm interested in, just to kind of let you know, are really like the jobs and economic impact piece. And maybe that's more of an issue for the commissioners rather than the planning department, but I'm just kind of curious how we may be restricting ourselves in terms of job creation, investment, and revenue if we pursue an approach that is overly restrictive. I understand there may be a place for some reasonable policies, so I'm interested to learn more from the other commissioners, from staff, and from stakeholders. So curious about that. I did notice or see a report that said, I'm not sure exactly what the date was. It looked like it was a couple years old, but statewide there are several thousand jobs in the wind industry. So just curious about that piece. And then I guess the second piece might be more for Chris Anderson and team, just to learn more about what is the state's legal framework for siting for clean energy. Because if I heard the presentation right in the beginning, it sounds like basically there's a state permitting or siting pathway that makes or has the potential to make any local restriction null and void. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes, that's correct.
So just like to kind of understand what other counties are doing it better and how that relates to the connection between any county policy and state policy.
Okay.
I guess just to follow up on that, Chris, I'd be curious, are there examples that we can learn about where that state board has either deferred to a local policy, or do they just ignore it by practice, or just how does that work in terms of that state approval if a project goes through that pathway?
We can look into it a bit. At this point, I don't have that background. And I guess it's going to depend on the board's timeline on moving forward with this, but we will certainly look into what we can. There has been very little statewide as far as local regulation on this. Whitman County is one of the few. I believe Kittitas County may have addressed it as well. But I am not entirely sure about that. Scott, have you looked elsewhere?
Those are the ones that come to mind.
Yeah.
But FSEC does have some case studies of their past actions that we could bring back and look at.
Okay. So we'll work with Scott and the planning department to look at that process and how it interacts with local regulation. But I do know at the end of the day that, yeah, FSEC does have the authority to cite these effectively regardless of local regulation.
Thank you.
So I'm just thinking about this, posing a question. I'm not sure that I really know what side of this to fall on, but as we look at the windmill generation, are we looking to provide energy for Spokane County, or are we looking to be a major exporter of energy to other parts of either the state or the country or Canada? And if there, at what point is too much? kind of a deal. And is that a consideration we ought to be talking about? I don't know. I just wonder, you know, are we, you know, I look at the Vantage Hill when you're heading to Seattle and, you know, with all of those turbines, I wonder if they're not changing the rotation of the earth. But I know they're not, but anyway, there's an awful lot of them. And, you know, you go down to Oregon, there's a ton of them. They're major exporters. They're producing more energy than Kittitas County would ever use. But is that a goal for us or not? I don't know.
All right, anything else on this topic? Okay, move on to the next one. We're gonna stay with Scott, GMA Comprehensive Planning Housing Elements. Allocations among counties, cities and towns.
Thank you, commissioners. This is a preview. The steering committee of elected officials will see a version of this as well tomorrow and a discussion about countywide planning policies. We have some slides for you. Go on, Ron. Thank you. Next slide, please. So the housing requirements are different than they have been in the past, a much greater level of detail. You can see kind of the three major steps here. And what it really comes down to is planning for these housing allocations by income level within our urban growth areas as a whole. Next slide, please. Department of Commerce has produced a tool, an Excel sheet to do this analysis with their methodology. They call it the Housing for All Planning Tool. It makes these allocations based on the growth projections for each county. We are working through the PTAC on what sort of fine tuning there may be to these. But it's since there's an accepted methodology, it certainly makes it easier to have something that Commerce will support. And we'll talk about it here in just a minute. But what this does, maybe I should say what it does not do. It does not force communities to build housing in income stratas. What it does say is each community must have appropriate zoning to allow for and direct those housing allocations in their community. And it's done by area median income. You can see some of the categories here. You know, what's called extremely low, very low, low income, and so it's 50 to 80% of area median income, or AMI. These are the bands that are used to push this forward. Next slide, please. There are two main methodologies that were created by Commerce, and then creatively called A and B. A is the one that is more direct. B was done as a kind of as an experiment for King County, but both are available to us to be using. The planning technical advisory team, PTAC, has looked at both of those. And for the moment, we're using A as what we call our hypothesis. Next slide, please. A allocates housing based on its share projected growth. So if the unincorporated part of Spokane County was forecast to grow at 30%, it would have to account for 30% of each of those classifications. This creates, it's one way of laying that out. It has created some big numbers in areas and small numbers in other areas, and some of the jurisdictions at PTAC are uncomfortable with method A at this point. But it's used, like I said here, we're using it as what are things going to look like. Next slide, please. This is going to be very hard to read, but this is what method A looks like. And notably, what you can see is, or what you should be able to see is the population forecasts are on top. Each of the communities is on the left side, and then each of those bands is in the middle with estimated existing supply and then allocated new numbers. And so what this does is it puts a number to each of these. And for example, on the 50 to 80% median income, the unincorporated county would have to accommodate 2,100 units. In the lower income, almost 4,700 units. And as you might imagine, the city of Spokane, the city of the Valley also have big allocations in there as well. So this will be something the steering committee will talk about tomorrow. But we also wanted to show you method B on the next slide. And the difference with B is instead of a share of growth, it's a share of the projected population at the end. It's a subtle difference in numbers. And if you go to the next slide, you can, again, it's too small to see that, but it changes fairly dramatically. For example, the unincorporated growth areas of Spokane County in that 30 to 80% median income. Before it was 4,700. Here it would be almost 8,000 units would be assigned to the county. And so it has some big changes in how that's going to happen. And naturally for the unincorporated county, creating zoning, creating housing policy is on your table, is within your purview to do so. But it's a real challenge outside of core cities. So it makes it, you know, if method B was to be chosen by the steering committee recommended to you, it certainly puts the county in a much more challenging position to accomplish this.
So how's the action that the city council is contemplating influence this? Because if they're issuing moratoriums again on where they're gonna build, and they're gonna take a major part of the development opportunity in the city out of the equation, I mean, we'll never hit this. And I'm challenged by taking advice from an entity that has got us 1 million houses under projected, meaning the Department of Commerce. I mean, they haven't gotten it right yet. So why are we forced to use their model?
If I could go to the next slide, I can answer that for you.
Okay, that would be great.
Because there is the opportunity for a method C. A method C is anything that we can create and defend. As you might imagine, it's a harder challenge because we would have to be able to defend it to commerce, to organizations like FutureWise that are looking at us. But it is allowed within the commerce direction on GMA. So we can, through this PTAC and through the steering committee, we can come up with, and frankly, I'm certain we're going to have to end up here at the end of the day because A and B, there are so many differences between the unincorporated county and the central city and the small cities. You can't reconcile them with that one size fits all methodology, in my opinion. So I believe we're going to end up at a hybrid system of some kind. Yeah. Yes.
All right, just quick question. So maybe you can't explain B to me, but in a short way, but why would method B change things so drastically? Just trying to understand.
Sure. Method A is based on the share of growth, percentage of growth.
Right.
Method B is the share at the end of 2046, how much of the population of the county is in each of these areas, not how fast or how you got there. And so since the unincorporated Spokane County is the fastest growing part of the county. We're projecting to grow the outside by about 38,000 individuals, the city by about 22 or 23,000. So that means at the end of 2046, we will have a higher percentage of population than we have now, which is why the B numbers go up for county.
Okay.
Does that
So this
make
is all
sense?
based on the initial first take on population growth allocations.
Yes.
Because we're doing the initial look, and then all the cities are going back and the county re-looking at their numbers, adjusting, and then we're gonna adjust that potentially, right, the second time around.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
but this is just based on the first initial growth allocation.
And it's based, it's not a number that we created, it's the OFM population number plugged into Commerce's forecast, and then it just populates all the way out based on their methodology for A and B. So we have not made any adjustments to this.
Okay.
Unlike the population forecast, which you saw before, which we did some hand adjusting because.
Right, that's on the agenda for tomorrow as well, right?
Yeah.
And those you messed
were
with
showing
some of the small
Negative
city,
growth because some of the
Right.
cities had shrunk over time and
Right.
we're bringing them back to at least zero or small growth, but those are you know, almost rounding errors in the sense, but there's some hand manipulation. And frankly, that's probably the analogy we're gonna need here.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, talk about C.
Okay, well, C is, like I said, anything we can make of it.
Is there an example of another county that's
Not yet.
developed a C?
No, we haven't seen one yet. One more slide, Ron, please. And,
Commissioner Jordan.
Hey, on method C, I was just wondering in the RCW, kind of surprised to hear that it's anything. So I'm just wondering, what are the guardrails on that? What does defensible mean when you say that we'll need to defend it to commerce and others? What does that look like? Just curious if there's any structure around the flexibility that we have there.
Commissioner Jordan, at this point, no, as Commissioner Waldorf mentioned, we have not seen anybody else creating a method C yet. We've had that discussion with Commerce and their reps that sit with us on our Thursday planning studios. And they acknowledge that it is essentially completely unstructured, but defensible in the sense that if we produced results that were wildly different from A or B, and didn't have a reason for why that was true. You know, for example, if we were planning on allocating that 0 to 30% AMI to areas that were nowhere near transit or jobs or other social services, there would be a hard time saying that's a rational justification. So there's going to be a series of criteria or parameters around this that will have to, that would be good planning practices as well as good social and community development practices. And it's our sense that if we can do that in a defensible manner, we'd be able to share this with Commerce and have them check off on it. Having said that, it's also very useful to have our Commerce reps sit with us as we're creating this, so we're not dropping something on them at the end and saying, "What do you think?"
So PTAC, you said, is going to discuss this, and the steering committee will basically give us a recommendation. Is that am I correct in hearing that?
Yes, although the steering committee is not making a recommendation tomorrow, we're introducing it to them as well.
Right.
I wanted to make sure that the 5 of you had a chance to see this before it went to the steering committee.
Okay, thanks.
Next slide. And then, you know, lastly, this is how kind of the density and zoning categories relate to these income levels. And this is somewhat hypothetical, but it lays out generally where you find things. So our traditional LDR is generally at that greater than 120% of area median income. So these other ones are generally not feasible in those. So the moderate, low rise, mid rise, all play a role in where the zoning is going to be able to accommodate this kind of use.
How do you, so HUD doesn't allow a community to designate different areas of the community by income. And yet that's exactly what this is doing. And so how do we reconcile the challenge with HUD with a state mandate that says thou shalt? And then the other part of it is, God, this is starting to look like redlining to me again.
Those of us of a certain age in this business
Yeah.
remember the 70s and 80s housing policies that led to the Robert Taylor Homes,
Yep.
Rodrigo and St. Louis,
Absolutely.
Cabrini Green, Chicago.
Yep.
And that even the argument from the legislature and GMA saying communities must accept their fair share of housing. That's language like straight out of the old action grants. So it's a little troubling in that sense. The way we're interpreting it, or the way we believe Commerce is interpreting it, is it's an allocation to the community. The community decides how they're going to do that. And these zoning allocations are simply there to say, you must allow this in there rather than you must put it here. So it's coming at it from, you must have accommodation in your development regs to allow this housing in your community. Again, it doesn't mean, frankly, it doesn't mean it'll ever get built. It simply says you must have the development regs that if the market says it can go here, you can't prevent it. So it's a slightly different twist on what was done, 40 years ago.
So you're having a deja vu moment too. Yeah.
The old urban development action grants, the UDIG grants and stuff from those days, yeah, they
Tore cities apart.
Commissioner Jordan.
Hey, Scott, we just heard from the assessor this morning about a property up on Manitou Boulevard that because of either legislation or local policy, I'm not exactly sure, is kind of being split up into 5 pieces. I think one property or one lot. And then, of course, the city has basically made its BOCA policy more permanent. And so do those things, the lot splitting and the density regulations that have been passed in recent years, do those factor into this math?
not directly yet, but quite logically they would for any of the communities, because if you are going to try to accommodate a lower priced housing product, the corresponding densities almost have to go up to make anything work on an economic basis. So splitting lots into 4 pieces is something that is a clear infill strategy, and one of the concerns we've got, which this kind of leads into what we were doing before I came over here, which is the land capacity analysis. It is reflective of how much land do you have left, how can you use it, and what can you accommodate before you ask to push out your boundaries beyond that. The city took a very aggressive approach in 2016 and has said in our current discussions that they're not going to do that. And yet they've changed their development regs to be more aggressive for infill properties. Something that Commissioner French noted early on, and the PTAC has agreed to, and the steering committee has agreed to, is if you're going to have that kind of increased density in your existing areas, can your infrastructure in fact handle it? So there's also a limiting factor on just how many more units can you attach to the same pipe?
To give you more detail on that, Chris, the size of sewer lines in a lot of our older neighborhoods was done, 50, 60, 70 years ago, contemplating that, they're going to have 12 homes, which is a standard block, 12 homes into that pipe on one side of the street, 12 on the other, and so a total of 24. You increase that by a factor of 4. Now you're talking about 100 homes, and guess what ain't going to flow? What you're putting in that pipe. And unless the city's in a position to where they can go back and reinvest and dig up those pipes and increase the size, it's a matter of just pure physics that it's just not going to work. You're gonna have a great dream, but at some time you got to wake up. And so this is, aspirationally, it sounds good. Practically, it doesn't work that good. And I have talked to a couple developers that even just increasing 4 lots on a piece of property can be a challenge for the city, much less the whole block going in that way.
So to follow up on that, that'll be the next round of calculations and study that the city would have to do if they want to advocate for changing what the allocation is for the city for the 2026 update, right? They would have to show we can accommodate this growth in this area with these increased densities, but maybe, and then also what are the utility and street infrastructures to support that?
Yes, and they have agreed to do that earlier on in the process, so it's not a surprise.
But they also agreed to provide infrastructure in Lake Tahoe Valley 25 years ago that they haven't done. So how do you hold them accountable for making promises that they do not honor?
Commissioner, I think that's a little bit above my pay grade.
Yeah, no, but it's going to be part of the conversation because you got, I was there on the planning commission when we allocated that population of Lake Tahoe Valley with certain conditions. 25 years later, none of those conditions have been met. And now you got a neighborhood that's screaming because they don't have fire, they don't have parks, they don't have transportation, they don't have anything. And yet they're getting the pressure from development, but no infrastructure. And we think that they're gonna go back and redo infrastructure in existing neighborhoods when they can't even do it in a greenfield. I mean, at some point, there's gotta be some kind of reality check to this.
I guess the one thing I could address that is, the process that we laid out for 2026 was for each of the communities, each of the cities and towns to do their own first cut at their land capacity and their growth strategies, recognizing that the county would in fact check their work. So we're not going to bring back to the steering committee a blanket promise from the communities without our side being able to check that work and even ask the questions about infrastructure. Can we guarantee anything? No, and the steering committee will make a recommendation to you. Ultimately, the decisions on that growth falls to this table. But the guarantees, even the best intentions, the best master plans are subject to the market and whims and COVID, and you can only do so much.
Well, I mean, it's gonna come back, we're gonna have to also be able to show in our capital planning that the county can accommodate new growth in our unincorporated areas.
Correct.
And that we can pay for it. So it's the same, it's just new infrastructure maybe versus updating old infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, the new infrastructure is gonna run you probably half of what going in and tearing up existing infrastructure is gonna cost, and then replacing it and stuff. You've got demolition costs that's just add on. So I mean, the numbers at some point just don't make sense. I mean, aspirationally, great, but can you actually perform? God, based upon the last 25 years, no.
Well, and it's not just the infrastructure, but the water, access to water, and other key elements as well.
And just as a reminder, the steering committee tomorrow will also see the first draft of an interlocal agreement that splits up the cost of updating the coordinated water system plan for the first time in 30 years, priced out by planning grant dollars from Commerce. So we are going to be reassessing where's the water, who has it,
Where's the water?
Is it what they call paper water? Or is it wet water? Can it actually be distributed to growth and use? So that's going to go along in a parallel fashion, right, with the comp plan effort.
But when we're talking about water, though, it's not, we've got an aquifer that's got like, I think 586 million gallons of water a day flowing through it. I mean, when I was at the city and HDR came in and did an analysis, they said the city had enough water to support growth for another 100 years. What they don't have is the pipes and pumps to be able to get the water to where it needs to be. And again, that comes back to infrastructure. You can only push so much water through a pipe until you increase the size of it, or increase the size of the pump, or create more reservoirs to where you can, stage getting water to where it needs to be. But I did get approached by a couple property owners south of the city that said that the city has contacted them about extending water and sewer south, and that they see that as a growth opportunity because they don't have any competition where West Plains and going east and north is problematic. Hey, God bless you, you can go south all the way to Whitman County if you want. Has there been any conversation about that at PTAC?
No, we've not heard any of that. The city of Spokane's retail water service area is geographically extensive. It goes a long way to the south and to the southwest. So it's entirely likely they could be a water provider out there. However, they can't provide sewer outside of the UGA boundary. So there's that limiting factor into the Moran Prairie area. It's an area that we'll be looking at because a lot of it is zoned urban reserve. So it's a very good candidate for growth in the future, but it's not there now.
That just got me thinking about the joint planning areas. Has there been any more discussion about like that area with the county and city? Kind of sharing land and then sewer and water? Has there been any conversation, stormwater issues between the city and the county?
There has, it's still at a pretty informal basis, between Spencer and myself, but the study area is broadening a little bit to go essentially south from Rand Prairie and then wrap all the way to I-90. Look at that whole quadrant, rather than as an individual piece. Because one of the major elements to make any of that work is east-west connectivity. It's very challenging because of topography, railroads, rivers. And by challenging, I mean expensive.
Yeah, when I was talking about water, I was talking about, I think the city had, so you're right. City has a lot of water, right?
Yeah.
But the infrastructure to pipe it out and store it is
That's where the
challenging.
challenge is.
The other areas, some of the other areas of the county, we will find out if there is enough water for growth.
We have found that there are challenges already. It was a surprise to me.
I'm interested to learn from that water system plan, because
Right, Commissioners, we wanted to give you just a high level preview of the housing allocation tool that's being used. And said steering committee will get a little more detailed version of this tomorrow. And then we'll go put it back in the box and start cranking and start looking at how we make this thing work for us.
Okay. All right, so more tomorrow for the three of us.
just one last question about the housing. If we're gonna develop a Part C or a Method C, is that something that you're gonna do internally, or are you gonna look for some contracted support for the planning department?
A little bit of both. Our guys are really up to speed on being able to dissect these commerce models, and we're really comfortable that we've got a good feel for be able to make recommendations back to our planning commission and to the five of you. But we will use some of our outside contractors to to provide guidance, perhaps a different version of best practices, and so we'll have kind of as subject matter experts as well as the things we've learned in-house.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you, commissioners.
All right, that brings us back around to miscellaneous. Any miscellaneous items, Chris?
I have got one. Commissioners CUNY and Jordan, I did just send an email with this same information that I'm handing out to everyone else. We received an appeal of an excessive sewer bill, or an allegedly excessive sewer bill. This matter, the board pursuant to the first page there, which is county code, that dictates this, that appeals of sewer bills go to the board. So that is the packet that we received from the appellant. I wanted to get that out to all of the commissioners to review and consider. Next week, I will come to the board with some procedure and kind of the outline on how we can handle this and address it, and there may be some options, so we may meet in some executive sessions to address those. For the interim, because the board is going to be hearing this in a quasi judicial capacity, I do need to ask the commissioners not to communicate with Kyle or his team on this until we have set up the parameters and set up how this should be addressed. Matt Koza is advising Public Works on this matter, and he will continue to do so. I will be advising the board in your quasi judicial capacity on this matter. And so Matt and I will not be having communication on this either, in order to ensure fairness. Because this is quasi judicial, the appearance of fairness doctrine also applies, meaning that in addition to kind of normal conflicts of interest, we have a heightened standard on this. So even if you don't have an actual conflict, if there is the appearance of a conflict, that would also potentially disqualify a commissioner from hearing this matter. So if you review this and you have any prior knowledge of it or any connection to the parties involved, please let me know immediately so we can handle that appropriately. If you have any questions on the quasi judicial aspects or on the appearance of fairness doctrine, please let me know. MRSC has some good resources on the appearance of fairness doctrine for your reference, but I'm also happy to answer any questions. As I said, this particular type of appeal does not have an explicit procedure laid out in the code. So I'll be bringing some proposed procedure forward next week to handle this. We may need to set a special meeting to address this matter. And so we'll be dealing with that. I'll have that prepared next week to move forward with. And then once the board decides on the procedure and timeline, that information will go out to both the appellants and to Kyle's department as far as when the board would like any documents submitted and presentations, et cetera, on this matter. So that's it for today. Just some information and documents for review. And then if there are any preliminary questions, happy to address those. Otherwise, we'll have some more prepared for next week.
Mr. French.
So I don't recognize the company name.
Okay.
But, so I don't know what the individuals are behind the company name. So I don't know whether I've got a conflict or not.
Okay.
Is that something you can share with us?
So we can,
It
yes,
doesn't have to be in
yeah,
the meeting, but
yeah.
offline or online or something, just so I can assess whether I've got a
Absolutely.
conflict or not.
Absolutely.
And then the other question is, I'm the chair for the Clean Air Agency, and we manage, monitor cannabis. And so might there be a conflict with what we do there and what they do here? And if so, you might want to have a conversation with Michelle.
Okay.
Michelle Folsom,
Okay.
just to make sure that I just want to make sure that I've got a clean
Absolutely.
record.
I don't think so on its face. That's my
Yeah.
initial based on, the context of this one.
Right.
But certainly, I can check in with Michelle
Yeah,
and
you
just
wouldn't
make sure
mind
there's
there.
no overlap.
Yeah.
On those two roles.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, any other miscellaneous items? I am aware of one executive session today, so anything before executive session? Scott? You have something?
Becca sent me something. Yeah, we can chat about it later.
Okay, all right, so and one executive session?
Yes.
Okay, you wanna?
And it is, yes, it is, labor negotiations, RCW 4230-144. That will include the board, Chris Anderson, myself, Mike Sparber, Ashley Cameron, and Josh Grote, if he is available. Expect to be about 20 minutes and no action will be taken.
All right, sounds good. It is 10:45, so at the conclusion of that executive session, we will not be coming back together until our 2 o'clock. So we will adjourn our morning meeting at the conclusion of the executive session, and we'll see everybody